everybody, today I am driving a 2006 BMW Z4 M. I have had a few encounters with the Z4 M previously, notably when I owned one for about 6 months. I also reviewed one on the channel last year. However, they were both coupes, and so for a few different reasons I'm very happy to get behind the wheel of this. First off, it is quite obviously not a coupe. Secondly, when I reviewed that coupe, it was on roads that were less than ideal for that kind of car. Today, I'm on my home turf, and so this is going to be the perfect scenario for seeing whether I judge this car right or if I've been a little bit too harsh on it. This particular car also has a couple of very subtle modifications, and wow, that branch is getting quite low now. It has an E-Venturi carbon intake, courtesy of the very good people at Evolve, and a Hayward and Scott back box. That, thus far, is it. No other modifications to the car. So to recap for those who don't know what this is the Z4 M Roadster, codename E85 for the coupe, the E86. It is based on the first generation Z4, and it has the S54 engine from the E46 M3. However, it doesn't have quite the same gearbox. These came exclusively in a manual 6-speed, which was a ZF unit. Unlike the Getrag, you got an E46. These did not get the warmest welcome when they came out. As is often the case with any sporty convertible, comparisons were drawn with the Boxster. And the moment you do that, you set a car up for failure, because in terms of all-round ability, the Boxster is brilliant. It is pretty unbeatable. I mean, it's a mid-engine car, and the moment you compare a front with a mid-engine car, you got a pretty flawed comparison on your hands. However, the Z4M did win some brownie points back, namely with that engine, which is a very characterful and zingy lump, and people really did miss it. By the time these were in production, the E46 M3 was done. It gives it a real proper British old school roadster vibe. It makes some lovely noises, and I have to say that the modifications performed on this one are, I think, pretty necessary, because they just don't sound that great as standard. Very typical of BMWs of the period. It's pretty punchy though. Pulls reasonably well from about 2,500–3,000 RPM, which is surprising considering it's only a 3.2 litre engine without any sort of forced induction helping it along. Of course, if you're used to the modern B58 or S55 engines, you might be a little bit disappointed, but this is one of the true old school greats. However, in my experience, not all S54s are built equal. Some have really impressed me, some have not. This one feels pretty good indeed. I'm very thankful to its owner John for bringing this out last minute. His particular car is also finished in my favourite colour, Interlagos Blue. Stunning shade. Now the gearbox, once you're on the move, is pretty good. It's a very short throw. He wants to put a different gear knob on it, the ZHP knob, which is shorter and heavier, and I think that's a very good idea, but it's actually decent. It's when you're in town, when you're trying to just move around at low speeds, the Z4M always just felt like a very awkward child. It really did. It didn't want to go to school today. But when you thrashed it, it was magnificent. Now, a few things to note about the Z4M, and indeed the regular Z4 as well. It's pretty cramped in here. Now, I've got a little bit of movement on the seat left, but there's not a lot of room between my legs and the steering wheel. If you are long of leg, you may struggle getting into this. My S2000 has absolutely no adjustment whatsoever on the steering wheel, and yet there's more room in that car. The S2000 feels like a much roomier car. And that's very odd. You wouldn't expect that to be the case, but it is. You also feel like you're sat a lot further down in this with a much higher bonnet line. And It's not really a problem. Visibility with the roof down is of course excellent. One of the problems of the coupe is that whenever you take any car that's meant to be a convertible and turn it into a coupe, your rear visibility will suffer. And I'm sure this is probably rubbish with the roof up as well, but roof down is what this car is designed for. There are a lot of other things that I really do like about this car. The interior feels quite special. Everything's pretty high quality. The layout is different enough from a regular 3 Series for it to feel like something of its own, special. This car has the flip-up nav screen, which at one point in time was a very desirable option, and now of course is just laughably out of date. But fortunately, it can just be made to vanish. Oh, all right. I saw him out the other day. In terms of fuel consumption, this car's owner has got an average of 24.5 since the last time that he reset the trip counter, and I would say that's a pretty honest average. These cars can do a little better, but only a little. They are not an economical car. Treating the gearbox more like an old school Italian one actually seems to work quite well for it. You can shift through the gears very fast if you want to, but for driving around at normal speeds, taking a little bit longer than you think you should actually seems to really help it. I think that exhaust system has been judged just about right, because it makes a pleasant sound, but not too much of it. The boot in the Z4M is actually not too bad either. Of course, it's down on capacity compared with the coupe, but it's about even with the S2000, which is to say, it's a little bit bigger than you might expect. If you're used to, say, some hardtop convertibles, it's actually very decent. And this car's owner also has an Audi R8, which is far worse on space. In the BMW tradition of old, you have a proper limited slip differential at the back, and the other button down here, which you can also press should you so desire, is the sport one. Now, I don't go anywhere near sport because I think all it does is ruin the throttle response. In the regular Z4, it actually did a little bit more because those had electric steering. And there were a couple of things that BMW M Division changed when they built the Z4M. First off, they gave it hydraulic power steering, and that probably due to the fact that this uses an engine which I don't think ever went with an E-Pass system. They also ditched the run-flat tyres that BMW fit as standard on the rest of the Z4 range. In theory, that should have meant that these were a great handling, good steering feel car with a reasonably compliant ride, especially as they came with only 18-inch wheels from factory. But in the coupe, I just never ever found that to be the case. Is this Roadster any different to what I remember? Let's find out. The suspension feels perhaps a little less harsh than my memory would dictate, but the car feels still unnecessarily bouncy. The front end also doesn't feel quite as tied down as I would like it to. Now perhaps I have been spoiled with the many different cars that I get to drive on a regular basis, but there's a disconnect, there's a moment of hesitation, more of one than I would deem acceptable in a car like this. It'll go around these corners very happily, but I don't really have that much in the way of confidence in the car. The hydraulic steering is direct enough, and you can tell that it's doing the job, but it's just not feeding back the information. The whole thing feels like it's just a little bit disconnected. However, there is a solution to this. It's not an obvious one. You see, the way people want to drive this car is a little bit like this. Now, 'cause this just isn't the Z4M's happy place. It's not. You start to throw it around and it becomes all a little bit uncertain. It's constantly being asked difficult questions and it's being all political on me. It's giving me very vague answers on everything and dodging the questions I'm asking of it. But if you just ratchet it down a little bit, and this is where the Roadster differs greatly from the Coupe. You see, the Coupe only made sense when you are thrashing the living daylights out of it. But the Roadster, thanks to that added level of interaction, especially with this exhaust on it, works far better as a 7 or 8/10ths car. That engine's got a really good spread of torque. It's not the fastest, but the way you should drive this car is like this. Enjoy the power, change gear, gently tip it in, bit more torque, change gear slowly. Oh, a bend. I'm going to change gear unnecessarily. Now, annoyingly, with that sport button not active, heel and toe isn't always as easy as you might think, and you need a really firm press on that pedal. But if you're not trying to brake at the same time as you're rev matching, everything becomes that little bit easier. You go, oh, here's a little bit of straight, and I'm doing 45 miles an hour, and I want to enjoy it. Lovely. Really pleasant. Then you begin to flow with the car. Then it all begins to make so much more sense. Then you kick back a little bit and you start to enjoy the scenery. This is one of my favourite bits of this test route. Look at this, absolutely glorious. That straight sixes just burbling away in the background. Everything is right with the world. Just part throttle, and it feels and sounds almost like a classic British sports car. Historically, brakes have always been an M car weak spot, but for road use, these are actually very good. And if memory serves, they are pinched straight from the M3 CSL, so they're pretty good items as standard. Same for the steering rack, not that it seems to have helped. Blissfully, unlike a lot of Porsches, this car is also geared very sensibly. And that means that you can enjoy that engine just a little bit more, and you can rev it out just a little bit more often without doing silly speeds. You can still improve the Z4 a lot, but the issue I have with the Coupe is in many ways not actually unique to the Z4M Coupe. A Coupe is always something that's going to be or feel like a much racier car, something that you always expect to be a sharp thing, a real good handling vehicle. And it simply isn't, which means it can just get a little bit annoying. You take the roof out of the equation, and suddenly I find a lot of forgiveness for the car. The Z4M is still deeply, deeply flawed, one of BMW's biggest missed opportunities. I mean, they just can't get sports cars right. It is a nervous tick that they seem to have. It just can't be done. But this is very enjoyable. Who put this tree here? This is a stupid... Look at this. I cannot see anything out this bend. I've got a car with a big long nose, and I've just got to slowly edge it out until I can either go or somebody swipes it off the front of the car. Stupid. Some of you may remember that I drove a while ago the later E89 Z4 with the 35 S-Drive IS or whatever it was called, which is the closest that BMW came to recreating the Z4M in that generation. That's a very different car with a totally different character to it. And in many ways, that is a superior cruiser. There's a lot I like about that car. But this has still more of a sports car edge. It's an imperfect thing. And as a car to thrash, I'd say I probably actually enjoy the S2000 a bit more. But then you need to, because the S2000 just doesn't have the pull from low down that this does, which I think is fairly obvious, to be honest. And if I'm being completely honest, steering is also an S2000 weak point, as is suspension, but in a very, very different way. Now, I keep talking about the S2000 because I own one, but because also these days you're probably looking at reasonably similar money for an S2000 or a Z4. Running costs on one of these are going to be a bit higher. It's going to drink more. Servicing these old units is not the cheapest. The big service in particular costs a lot of money because you are supposed to do the valve adjustment on these, and a lot of people don't. So if you're going to buy one, check that that's been done. This car is on just shy of 54,000 miles, and I have to say it feels very well screwed together as well. This car may have been assembled in South Carolina, but unlike many BMWs not built in Germany, it doesn't seem to have suffered all that much for it. I know it's not a perfect model, but this particular example feels very tight. Overall, if you're able to buy an M car and you can be satisfied with the fact that you don't want to thrash it all the time, the Z4 M Roadster is well worth looking into. I once said if ever I was going to buy another Z4M, it would almost certainly have to be a Roadster. And I'm glad to say that that is still an option that is very much on the table, because this is a far more enjoyable car in this kind of condition than the Coupe. It really is. Thanks for watching. Please like, comment below, subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you for the next one. Bye bye.